So, my uncle tried to hook me up with an older boyfriend, but you will not believe the lengths that he went to for this to happen, and let me just tell you, I'm disgusted. Guys, I have one story for you today, but it's filled with juicy drama. So, without any more holding, let's get right into it. They say you should be careful who you trust, because the person who's kind to you today may turn on you tomorrow. Especially in a foreign land where my uncle and aunt were the only family I had. I had no idea that I was living with heartless people who pretended to be family. If only my father allowed me to stay at the dorm with strangers, then maybe I would not have landed in such a difficult situation that almost made me homeless. At least, if I was with strangers, I would not expect them to be trustworthy. I would have been careful from the very start. What I'm about to tell you is something that happened in films, or stories that my mother forwards me to on WhatsApp. I did not think it would happen to me. I was born in Nigeria, but stayed in America with my parents for several years, before we returned as my father wanted to start a business. Even though we were well off, the country has its problems, which was one of the reasons why my dad wanted me to study overseas, since I finished high school. I did very well in my final exams, applied to many overseas and local universities, then I prayed. My mother, one of the most devout people I knew, said nothing could be done without praying. Sure enough, her prayers were answered when the golden email announcing my acceptance into a very good American university arrived. My parents were a bit well off, but the fees were still very expensive, which was where the part scholarship helped. There was just one problem: accommodation. The scholarship did not cover accommodation on top of it all. My parents were paranoid that I would not be safe in a city without family. My mother was worried that I would soon grow thin and would become so homesick for my country and culture. It was then that my father came home beaming one day, telling me that all our problems are over. He'd managed to pay the portion of the fees that were required. Flights were booked and all, and he found a place for me to stay with my uncle. In my culture, any older male or females is easily given the title of uncle, especially if it's a friend of your mother or your father. Uncle Jeff was an old friend of my dad, who had established his family in America. According to my dad, there was a time that I met him, but I was too much young to remember him. But the fact that my father trusted him so much to send his only daughter to live with him and his family made me agree. I came from a community where a family was not defined by blood, but just being of the same kind. We helped each other no matter what the cost was to us, especially if we were in a foreign land. This was the treatment I expected from my aunt and uncle, who were going to be my parents from then on. I wish I was not so naive and had just begged my parents to pay for the accommodation. It was not like they couldn't afford it. It was that they likely wanted to spare every penny possible. My mother had taken one look at the accommodation prices and said, "Oh, such a little room. This is enough to buy how many goats?" Like a typical African mom would say. So to save cost, I went to live with my uncle and aunt. In the beginning, everything was cool at home. I treated him with as much respect as I could, helping my aunt with house chores and my cousin Archie with his schoolwork. He was a senior in high school. My uncle was a very charismatic and generous man who drove me to university every single morning, and I made my way back later on. It was a bit difficult to adjust to the culture, but school was going very well. I knew that I was at a disadvantage, so I tried my hardest to ask for help from my professors at every opportunity that I got. Later on in the evening, we would have dinner and there we would talk about our day. My aunt mentioned that it seemed like I did not have many friends or any friends, or I just did not like to go out. In a light teasing way, she said it. I told her that I wished I had time to go out and make friends, but there was a particular course I was struggling to understand, and I feared I would fail, so that was where all my time went. When my uncle asked which one, he told me that he had a friend who was working in that field, who would love to mentor me if we managed to ask him nicely. I was very interested, which led to my uncle setting up a dinner for us. I did not think much of it when my aunt brought me a very beautiful but tight-fitting dress for me to wear to the meeting. When I tried to protest, she told me that I had to look nice. This was America, not some village back home, and that it was okay for me to dress like a young woman. Well, I was a bit self-conscious as my mom never let me wear such tight-fit clothing. It's not like all the girls in my country do not know how to dress. It was just how I was and the family that I came from. And by the way, I'm more of an introvert who likes reading and not dressing up as much. But I decided to step up a bit just out of my comfort zone by wearing that dress. After all, I wanted that mentorship, and how I presented myself was important. The dinner was at a fancy restaurant, which was a bit worrying for me. I had an allowance, but not that much for me to spend in that place, especially when I saw the crazy prices. I told them I was not hungry and ate earlier, but my uncle told me not to be silly since our guest was generous enough to pay the bill. He was an older gentleman, maybe in his 40s, with a very strange manner of speaking. He said that he was from all over Europe and had been a researcher and professor for so many years. I told him about the problems I was facing, and he gave me a few pointers. It was going very well, and I was sure he was going to agree to mentor me. I do not know if I did not understand something, or if I said something that made this man think something else of me in the convo. But honestly, I was just respectful, and all I wanted with him was the same. But he seemed to understand in his stupid head that I was flirting with him. How can he even think such a stupid thought when he was old enough to be my pawpaw? In the middle of dinner, when I was thinking he was a normal human being, my uncle told me that he was going to head back home and have an early night. I was about to leave early with him, but he told me that I would be a waste of opportunity for me to just leave so early. The professor was in the middle of explaining a very complex theory, and I was taking notes. I was so focused on the work, I was just getting it done, that I was a bit revealed that I was not going to get to go early. I had a very big test on this course in a few days, and my marks were slipping. So my uncle left, telling me that Mr. Edward, as he said I can call him, was going to drive me home. Sure enough, about an hour later, we're done, and Mr. Edward paid the bill. But then he started to act strange. He moved closer to me and said that I was very intelligent and had such a bright future. Well, I said thank you. Then he told me he could help me go anywhere, no matter what I needed. Money, help with schoolwork, or even a whole company. But when he said that it was not a normal company, no. It was a very strange way of speaking, and this hand was on my thigh. I got up so fast and asked him if he was crazy. He said I should be grateful. I was alone in this big old bad city, and I needed someone like him to make it. I was done listening to this fool who had other plans. I was raised to have morals, not sleep with men to get what I wanted. How could he even try that? I threw the glass of wine he was drinking on his face, told him to never talk to me again. He had the nerve to even try such a disgusting act. I was boiling with anger right then and there, and I was going to say things I regret, but I did not. My uncle would teach him a lesson as soon as I told him. Well, I left the restaurant boiling with anger and called an Uber that drove me home. As soon as I saw my aunt, I started crying. I told her that Mr. Edward was a very bad man. He tried to offer me money for, services. To my shock, my aunt pushed me away and asked if I was crazy. I asked her what was wrong. Then she said she did not blame me, she blamed herself. She was very stupid for thinking that I was smarter than my village mentality. Well, I was shocked. Where was this coming from? She was supposed to be on her way to that man's house to hit him over the head with her purse, until he gained some sense, not shouting at me. Then my uncle came out of their bedroom a few seconds later and he slapped me before I could say anything. Then, while I was crying and trying to understand what the heck I did wrong, he started shouting at me. He told me that my parents were sending peanuts to them. They take care of me for months, but I've proved to be useless. Now, he tried to get me a well-settled man to at least take care of my financial needs, because they were tired, but I went and messed it all up with my big uneducated head. Then he told me that I had 2 days to find a place to stay, because I was wasting food and space there. I was just now starting to feel that I was a burden to them. If I knew, I would have made a plan a few weeks ago. Why did they have to do me like this, huh? Trying to make me date an older man? I thought they saw me as a daughter, but oh, I was very wrong. I begged them to let me stay. I really had nowhere to go. But they told me that I had to go. But after a while, my aunt asked her husband if Edward would not give him a chance to fix things. Then they would let me stay as long as I used the money he gave me to help around the house. Before I answered, my uncle said that if he agreed, then I had one chance to impress him, or they would kick me out on the street. So it was either the streets or being sold to a man I did not know. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to go back home because this was not what I signed up for. All I could do for the next few days leading to my Edward meeting was stress the heck out. Every option I tried was not working at all. When I tried to see if I can apply for accommodation sponsorship, the applications were closed. I did not want to tell my parents because I knew they would start stressing and make me come home. I needed to stay here and get my education. I could not go back to the laughter of my relatives back home. My uncle told me that Edward wanted me to see on Friday night of the week, right after my big old test. Well, when I was writing that test that I was not even focused on, I was thinking about what would be better, getting kicked out or having to be with Edward. Suddenly, I started to feel very hot. I could not breathe, and then my vision started to fade, and someone shouted my name. I had stressed myself to the point of fainting. I woke up in a sick room where the nurse told me that stress was too much and my blood pressure was sky high. Was everything okay at home? I started to think about that night, and then I would not breathe again. She got me to calm down, then when I was good enough to leave, she took me to another room, the counselor's office. She was an older woman with kind eyes who appeared alarmed to see me. I vaguely remembered seeing her in the halls, but I had never ever even needed her help. Well, the nurse left us, then we started to speak. She told me a bit about myself and then started asking me questions about myself, my schoolwork, and any challenges that I might be having faced. And then she asked me about how things were at home, and I froze. I remembered that man touching me, and I started to cry without being able to control it. I had been trying to push the thoughts back for so long, but as soon as she mentioned it, I was happy or not, at home, I started crying. She managed to talk me down and finally convinced me to tell her what's going on. I was extremely ashamed to even tell her, but she would tell my uncle and they would kick me out is what I was afraid of. But she was reassuring and told me that it was a safe space. After I told her everything, she told me that what they had done was illegal and I did not have to go see that man. She would help me imagine this. A stranger was able to protect and help me in a few hours when two people I thought as parents were trying to sell me. She told me that I did not have to go back there. She would get some people to fetch my stuff. I could open a case against them or get a restraining order. It's my choice. But in the end, I couldn't get the restraining order because I had no evidence that they did anything to me. I was relieved that I've been saved from the worst thing that could have happened to me. When it came to the living situation, she managed to get me a space in a dorm temporarily, while she applied for more permanent places for me to stay. After all that, I knew I had to talk to my parents, whom I've been ignoring as everything got sorted out. When I talked to them, I knew that my uncle and aunt had already started lying about me. But I told my parents the whole truth, and soon they believed me. They were very angry that I did not tell them earlier so they could take me back home. They also lectured me about how unsafe I was and that it was better for me to just go home. But I told Mom and Dad I wanted to get my education. I stood up against them, which could have been bad effects, but luckily no. and told them I was staying put. I also told them I needed money for proper accommodation this time. There was a bit of a pause when I thought they were about to tell me that they were coming to drag me home and I should stop with my nonsense. But my father, a very stubborn man who could argue with the police even, asked me how the transfers could be made and also told me that they better separate the dorms by gender. I was so relieved. The nightmare that was keeping me stressed is over. My counselor got me a permanent room with a roommate that I get along with, and my studies are going great. I still see that family, but I avoid them at all cost. But they make funny faces when they see me as if I'm the wrong one. They'll get what's coming to them. They should just wait. The sad part about this story is it took all this that OP had to go through before she finally got what she wanted, just a chance at a better life living in a safe dorm, not with some creepy old man or an uncle who just doesn't care about you and only wants money. Guys, let me know what you would have told OP if you were stuck in this situation, or maybe how you would have handled it differently. Thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. If you're not subscribed to the channel, you can actually check the description below and see every channel Mr. Reddito has to offer. There's 3 of them. Try to subscribe to all of them because they all have different types of stories. And guess what? Each channel has daily videos. The channels are the one you're watching now, Mr. Reddito Animated, Mr. Reddito Stories, and Mr. Reddito Office Dramas. So subscribe to those if you want to, and I'll catch you in the next one.